Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. The first Sunday's reading series is sponsored by Saddle Road Press, a small literary press now located in Ithaca, New York, after many years in Hilo, Hawaii. Saddle Road has been in business since 2011 and has published 65 books of fine poetry and literary prose. Many of these wonderful Saddle Road Press authors will be reading in the first Sunday series. Dane Cervine's recent books include The Word is God's Language, Earth is a Fickle Dancer, I love that title, and The Gateless Gate, Polishing the Moonsword, as well as the new book, Deep Travel at Home in the Burning World. Dane lives in Santa Cruz, California. Deep Travel at Home in the Burning World is a book of contemporary haibun underlying this series of journeys through the great Midwest, Portugal, Spain, Morocco, a bit of French countryside, Italy, then later through New England, is an experience of pilgrimage. The Japanese poet Basho's famous book, Narrow Road to the Interior, explored both interiors of countryside and heart-mind. Ancient Zen poets grounded their work in nature itself, the passing seasons, infiltrating words with blossom and decay. Today, climate change appears as the ubiquitous background in many travels. In Deep Travel, this includes a cataclysmic fire in California at the author's ancestral home, unfolding at the end of his journey in drought-stricken Turin, Italy. The quest to find a sense of home in this fragile yet resilient world. Amy Holman writes about what is held captive, wild animals by humans or environmental destruction, the self by fear, and what captivates discoveries, exposures, and mysteries. From marine life to ultramarine pigment, the self in the world we can't separate from ourselves. She writes poems that delve into the news, plumb the past, and play with refrains to catalog absurdities, recklessness, lapis lazuli, shyness, and wonder. Amy is a poet, literary consultant, and artist. Captive is her sixth poetry book. She is the author of the collection Wrens Fly Through This Opened Window and 4 poetry chapbooks, including the prize-winning Wait for Me, I'm Gone. She teaches writers how to match their fiction, nonfiction, and poetry to the right publishers, and writes the Substack newsletter, What, Where? Literary Journals. In April 2021, she had a micro-residency through New York City Poets Afloat, where she visited an historic railroad barge docked in New York Harbor. She grew up in northern New Jersey and lives in Brooklyn, New York. I am very happy to introduce both of these wonderful poets, and I guess, Dane, you will begin.
Very good. Well, thank you to Ruth and Don so much for choosing these books and shepherding them into the world. And Amy and I are going to take turns, about 10 minutes each, going back and forth. Part of what we've enjoyed is reading each other's work in preparation for the reading and speaking a bit about the pilgrimage and sense of journeying and being held captive by what's going on in the world and the freedoms available within it. So this book has a series of vignettes that you can read once a day as kind of a meditation, but it's also a narrative, like an odd mini novel that can just take you with us on this journey. It begins in the Midwest, ends up in New England, and in between traverses Europe and Morocco. I'm going to begin on a Amtrak train from Chicago to Oakland while my wife was going over to Portugal to walk the Camino and then we meet up there. But here I am on the train. For those not familiar with it, it's has a little haiku. I'll pause and have a little haiku at the end, which is part of the haibun form. We've been ascending the eastern hills outside of Denver into the Rockies proper, seen from my perch in the view car. We'll pass through 43 tunnels, most of which are brief, though the trek through the Moffat Tunnel we're in now lasts 9 minutes, the longest tunnel on the California Zephyr line, a seeming eternity underneath the earth. This rhythm of light, then dark, then light, lulls one as a mantra, or the fingering of prayer beads. A tunnel feels oddly familiar, like the birth canal that brought me here, or the final tunnel past arrival, emptying into ultimate light or darkness. Or perhaps the journey is endless, just with a different view of things, like this train, not above from vast atmospheric realms, nor captive to the slow movement through cities. Rather, one sees the backside of terrain, heretofore invisible, the tiny hamlets of the Midwest, intimate, with names like silt, antlers, rifle, parachute, and the ones too small, even for a name. Just a single weathered house, a broken barn, someone singing in the garden. In a tunnel, I'm never clear whether dark or light is my favorite. And then from there, it's a fun journey to, when I reread the book, to trace our steps. And I end up next in this reading in Santiago, where I meet to begin our joint journey. And I have this experience. It is my first full day in Santiago, while Linda has been trekking the Camino for over 2 weeks. We walk to Cathedral de Santiago de Compostela for a full Catholic Mass, though we are informal Buddhists. The immense cathedral full of patrons, pilgrims, and tourists alike. In such moments, I am gullible as they come. Organ music swelling, mesmerized by the swing of an impossibly gargantuan incense brazier back and forth through the center of the church, toggled by priests pulling thick festooned ropes as fragrant smoke spews the air like a pagan dragon. I'd believe most anything in this moment, that we are worth saving, that anything can still happen on this smoking thurible of a planet. The sway of the brazier like a hypnotist's watch. I almost feel, I had seen pictures of this before, but it takes 8 men to toggle this intense brazier back and forth, and the mix of Catholic and pagan feel was quite amazing. And this image really struck me of this immense incense censer being like our planet, swinging back and forth through the spaces. So that began our journey, and it was quite the experience. Now, I'm going to jump ahead because I'm just going to try and give a sampling of some of the places we went to on our journey. It was very much an inner contemplative pilgrimage as much as an external journey. We wanted to get outside of America and look back at it and to experience ourselves more as planetary citizens than just of a single country. The next one finds us in Chefchaouen in Morocco, which is the blue city. If you see pictures of it, The entire town is a gorgeous blue. And we learn probably more from the various guides that became our friends. This one is Muhammad, who let us enter worlds that we wouldn't have access to otherwise. In Chefchaouen, Muhammad pauses in front of yet another blue door, lining the curving streets like exits from a labyrinth, each a portal to a world I will never know. The doors are decorated with symmetrical patterns of black nails or bolts that in the old days documented family births through the generations. Doors that held many generations, doors older than America as a country, Muhammad says. Suddenly I feel blue vertigo as centuries whirl down the alley like wind. Though nowadays the designs are mainly decorative, he says, families grow and move to other villages, to Casablanca, or even across the Mediterranean. Lives like wind, not a bolt, not a nail in an old door. The markets are full of eyes looking no further than here. I think Muhammad was such a gift to show us this fulcrum of the modern world and the old meeting in him, and the sense of loss of tradition of these bolts on the door, and the sense of this new freedom that kind of terrified and was very freeing for many of the young people. So I'm going to end this section and then turn it over to Amy to begin her section with, still in Morocco, but this time in Fez, and a real encounter with the medieval ancient world. In Fez, we are ushered inside an immense leather tannering warehouse. Traverse the retail areas open to tourist and local alike. The smells are overwhelming, but each visitor is given a sprig of mint to hold close to the nose. Each section is claustrophobically filled with leather goods of all kinds in crowded wooden rooms. The jackets are alluring, but I can't bear the thought of trying them on in the stifling heat. Finally, the stairs ascend till we come to a balcony overlooking a stark medieval scene, as the tannery guide says, because it has been in operation for a millennium. Long rows of tanning vats of varying color sprawl vast as a football field, where hides are brought after meat is taken to the market. Each skin is dyed for weeks before made into leather sheets, which are then worked into belts, decorative bags, the ubiquitous jackets, even skirts. The rugged gentleman who leads this tour has skin leathered by sun that beat down on him when working the vats as a boy. Very, very difficult work, he says, but now enjoys providing tours, meeting people like us. It is nearly impossible not to buy something from him, men and boys laboring for centuries to eke a living from hide. But no matter how many jackets I try on in the sweltering heat, none fit well. It is stifling. It is hot. I finally wilt buy some small trinket, a decorated piece of skin, a tattooed image burned in charcoal black to remember. A boy looks up at the balcony, stirring. I think that was one of the more potent and darker gifts left me in that travel, was that boy stirring and looking up at me, very haunting. Well, that's just the beginning of my journey through these deep travels. And I'm so delighted to have Amy echo and call and respond a little bit with her work. So Amy, take it away.
Thank you. This has been a fun experience, conversing with Dane about where our correspondences are in our poems. And when I go to compose a book, I like to I'm spreading out in all the subjects that I like, and then try to figure out what they have to do with each other. So in my two sections, you're going to get a lot of different things, but some correspondence with travel and the environment and nature. Reckless endangerment. All I wanted was a Garden of Eden. Antoine Yates. A photographer must be on the escape to capture this shot of an NYPD officer propped midair in blue headgear, sleeves rolled to bare arms, bearing arms. Offbeat, this beat. There's no surprising Ming, who stands with his white belly bulged against smogged glass. A man with arms raised to unfasten sash, but for his giant, whiskered head, agape with fangs. The cop's nape is flushed. He's close enough to shake the big cat's paw. Sleep hunts neurotransmitters in Ming's blood and brain since the cop's concoction pierced his fur. I hear that wheezing rage purr scattering through architecture's bind and human rules. What a bind are these human rulers, architects of docility and danger. A tiger chomped his man's thigh and paused. Despite blood tasting on his tongue, he listened to commands he'd heard all year and unbit mid-maul. Even tigers wrestle with consciousness. Ming lunged at the kitten, not really for the man who mothered him in a room. But Antoine fled as Eden, claimed to suspicious ER physicians measuring bites and calling authorities a pit bull attacked. Mud flats on river and snowy tundra runs, blood whispered to its captive Cayman alligator and Siberian Bengal, big cat, to live inside their minds, their instincts, and not as captives. The poem goes on for a few more sections, which you can read yourself, but I'm going to skip ahead to other intelligence. In shallow marsh beside the iron rails, an azure-crested, wing-tipped heron stands, unmoved by the blur of itself writ large, azure-crested Amtrak coursing low, alert instead to small carp and green frogs. Did it catch in its complicated eye that telescopes and microscopes and blinks right through slippery surface glare, my open mouth in one passing square? Eyes open day one, even if all it sees are apertures of plume. Great blues hatch as compact chicks whose necks uncoil the evening of their second day, extending views. Actually, a folding vertebrae equips a keen, quick hunter. Astute Ardea Herodias knows where to be unseen by what it wants and not. In cattails and bluing hues, it's not shy about a steel predator speeding a fixed course. At the optometrist, I too learned the brain chooses how it sees through multifocal contact lenses, the circles of remoteness and propinquity. Part of that poem came from having watched that Cornell ornithology bird cam of the great blue heron several years ago. I don't know if I should admit that I've never tried reading this next poem before, but visually, there are certain words throughout it which are highlighted with an italics, and then an indented part where I give you the root meaning of the word, and the poem moves through those that is propelled by those words. The title of the poem is a title of what I would consider a kind of strange news headline, but it was from the Brooklyn Heights Patch, June 24th, 2016. Unfortunately, the subject is still relevant. This was written during the 2016 presidential campaign time, when I noticed that the hate speech was almost exactly for immigrants, where it was almost exactly the same as for invasive species. Goat gardeners take the high ground in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Horatio, Hector, Minnie, and Eyebrows graze on language opposing change, economic and environmental harm to natives, in a burrow almost bursting with arrival. Great word from the Old French ad repam to the riverbank, in a new public park beside a loud expressway and an eastern river. No more broadleaf invasives out to displace and threaten stability. No more Japanese honeysuckle or poison ivy, each as delicious a repast. Middle English, derivative of Old French and Latin, pastus, fodder, the go-to goats prove. Just now, the news is overgrown with the raw material of hate, expressions of war and difference in our words, made worse by a recent campaign allowed to flourish like a rosa multiflora on a berm. The root of word, same as rose, Proto-Indo-European wordo, thorn, bramble, also same as verb, were, speak, to say, is both prickly and showy, refuge and barrier. Our culture is cross with its roads. Before 900, Middle and Old English, rad, a riding journey on horseback, bursting with a rival mentality, except that Latin, rivalus, one who uses a stream in common with another, reads as accepted as a neighbor. I like the goats' good work this summer, devouring the bullies that block the sun and strangle their neighbors when left to grow wild. Even the honeysuckle, with its brief, sweet expressions. Not that there ever was any such thing as invading in moderation, but the zebra mussels originating in Russia that consume the algae the fish want to eat, the fish that we want to eat, also filter toxins from our lakes. We want to protect the honeybees that are foreign to our continent. We like their product and their industry, pollinating the plants that sustain us. Do we consider indigenous bees, we many who are not native to this continent, arriving on railroads to make industry of faith? Who erects the infinite sky wall? Not the Mustang, wild, having no master, introduced tame to the Great Plains by Spanish conquistadors, and now an exotic, non-native the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife want out. Yet equus began 4 million years ago in North America, and before dying out in the late Pleistocene, made roads to Eurasia on land bridges. The masterless, we learn, is both emigrant and immigrant. Unlike the domestic goat from southwestern Asia and Eastern Europe, whose root name, Capra aggregus hircus, goat, wild goat, domestic goat, needs grazing. Tea time. A Xi'an emperor who'd unburdened his subjects of too much tax and upper classes was, to the ancient worlder's delight, buried with his tea buds, not just 2 chariots and the driving horses, millet from his north, rice from his south, crossbows, spears, and knives, ceramic pigs, oxen, elephants, unicorn, ducks, and unglazed female servants bowed and peering. As now, too, in 141 BC, a fine floral brew revives the mind at prayers, if not the breath, on the clop to enlightenment. A little funny there, but Dane, you're next.
That's just delightful. I was really struck in, the poem you read, Intelligence. It's the last poem in your book. And the last 2 lines strike me as something that's a part of kind of both of our journeys with our books. The being at the optometrist, learning how the brain chooses how it sees, the circles of remoteness and propinquity. And I feel that in your work. I felt it on our journey about how one chooses to see and being able to
yes, ways of seeing. Yes.
Yeah, and in multifocal ways to encounter things in different ways. The last thing I'll say is I love the clop to enlightenment. So easy to want something much more dramatic, but I think we're kind of on this clop to enlightenment.
Yes, we are.
Enough. Yeah. I'm going to go back to Portugal for a quiet little one, because we were there in Portugal for 2 weeks. And after you see all the cathedrals, and you see this and you see that, you finally settle in to life in a different place. In the evening, we walk Porto a bit, end up at a small family restaurant, O Buraca, and it is perfect. Seated in the back at a small table, we order salmon and sea bass, cooked as only the Portuguese do. No English is spoken, just eyes and hands and gestures. No one seems to hate us, nor privilege us in any way, as though we were familia, that it was enough to be a human being. The sacrament of food, more precious than passport or blood. The tongue needs nothing translated. And then I'm still in Portugal. Every time I read about one country, the other ones are going, what about me? What about me? But, they're in here. Get to them eventually. This was a delightful view of a palace, and where I read and learned a lot about Andalusia. So Andalusia is the integration of the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish cultures that existed in much of southern Europe. And for a while, had an enlightened sense of inclusivity and kind of a vision. And in this poem, in this palace, was also a vision about how to be rebellious in the small, humorous ways, just to let the king know what's what. I thought it was helpful. The curator of the Palacio Marques de Frontera leads us from room to room in the old residence as though on a treasure hunt, bids us examine the walls in one of the halls, look for hidden irreverences in the murals, like Where's Waldo books of childhood. Sure enough, amidst religious iconography and pious scenes, is a couple fucking in the bushes, a boy with a grin taking a dump behind the church, bare-breasted women toying with admirers. The old artisans had a sense of humor, and the family, too, almost daring priests to notice. Outside, too, pagan figures in various states of mischief adorn the chapel required of every Catholic household of standing. this minor rebellion to the requirements of state. Mother Mary keeping company with Pan, Jesus ignoring the mischievous satyr lurking around the corner, winking. In fact, the curator says this delightful mix of Christian and Arabic, religious and pagan themes is a hallmark of this lost Andalusian world. Well, at least if you're a friend of the king, manage to avoid inquisition when the powers that be shift, decide life is no laughing matter. Blue murals, evidence in plain sight. One of the things I was very struck by in reading, of course, is you know you're in trouble when there's a certain loss of humor in your polemics and politics and rulers. I'm going to finish with two very different poems from that earlier, The Gateless Gate, Polishing the Moon Sword. The first section of poems are all in response, in a traditional way, to the 48 koans of the Gateless Gate, which have been around forever. And my Zen teacher said, well, you're a poet. He was too. He said, why don't you go write poems in response to these koans? And I thought he was crazy, but I did it. And then the last sections, I'll read one of each, are little prose poems in response to traditional Japanese and Chinese stories. So the koan, oops, I'm on the wrong one. There we go. Koan 5. The koans are very straightforward and they don't make a lot of sense. But this one's called Man Up in a Tree. The master says Zen is like a man hanging in a tree by his teeth over a precipice. His hands grasp no branch, his feet rest on no limb, and under the tree, another person asks him, why did Bodhidharma come to China from India? Which is the standard ubiquitous line in most Zen stories. If the man in the tree does not answer, he fails. And if he does answer, he falls and loses his life. Now, what shall he do? So the poem that came from me in response is called Another Houdini's Last Trick. You're hanging by your teeth. The spotlight glaring, the stage tree surprisingly real, the leather harness tethering you to the branch, invisible to the audience, gasping as you sway back and forth, arms swimming, the emptiness like a fish, as your lovely assistant stands beneath you in her Las Vegas jeweled bodice, shouting, why, why, why? Nobody really expects you to answer. They barely understand the question, but good money is riding on whether true magic will happen. Can you unhinge your jaw from that last safety? Twist in the air and shout the one thing you've been wanting to say your entire staged life. Fall into the darkness beneath. Land where no one else can see. Angle toward the backstage door into the alley. Walk away into your one true life. That's kind of fun. And then just an example from the last one. Amy said she liked this poem, so I thought I'd read it. Again, based on old traditional stories. This is called Poem of the Body. Fujiwara falls asleep on the veranda of the Shinto shrine devoted to the patron deity of poets. It has been a long journey here from the palace. One sandal broken, feet muddy, heart troubled. His poems like stillborn birds, unable to fly from the egg. Why are his verses filled with dead blossoms, rain that will not fall, lovers that do not kiss? Perhaps here at the shrine, single stick of incense smoking in the rice bowl, The kami, or spirit of poetry, will find him, make life in the palace possible again. Instead, he falls asleep, and in his dream, the ghost of the old man he'd soon enough become frowns, dips an ink brush in the mud, writes a single kanji character on the sole of each foot, one for the belly, the heart, each shoulder and knee. Thus he becomes the poem he seeks.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think by journeying and poeting together, we become more of what we can be. And so this is a very evocative time together. So Amy, she'll bring us home.
So, well, maybe after we finish this, I would like us to explore a little about our different, what writing with a particular form, how it helps us express and where it takes us and all of that. Because I do it occasionally, but you rely on it and I'm sure it expands your ideas.
Let's do that. That sounds good.
And thank you. You read a few of the ones that I especially liked in your books, and it's fun to have that conversation. I'm gonna this poem. There used to be these writing sites where you could write a how-to article, and depending on how many people read them, you'd maybe get fractions of a penny. That one time I looked, and they had a whole list of how to make something, and I didn't write the article, but I did make it, and then I made a poem out of it. And there was the BP oil spill at the time, and then later when I was revising the aftermath. So this is a quintina, one part less than a sestina. How to make a whale out of an envelope. Start with the number 10, business size, and roll your pen from jaw to fluke. I think a humpback is easy to draw, with the spine along the fold, but you could choose the killer. To say this oil spill is a killer is apt. The BP likes to downsize catastrophe, make 6 or 7 folds on warnings, and shove them in a pocket. A fluke is a barb, a harpoon that will draw blood, a different kind of spill. Draw the dorsal fin of the killer whale before you do the fluke. It's a sharper angle of size on the envelope flap you unfold. Cut a blowhole in the fold of a number 10 on the crease. Now draw the mouth that seems to smile. A 10-size death is decimate. Gulf bleeds to sea, a killer reduction. An oil spill is not a fluke in a business without precautions. A fluke slapped on the sea can be SOS. As waves fold dispersants into gasoline and petroleum. Bluefin in cardiac arrest. Now draw the blind eye. We were too in love with tank size, reads our epitaph. Evolution makes a killer fold, shrimp without eyes. I can't draw a breath in the size of all our dying. Survival is a fluke. So, news. I go to the news a lot, or I go through the news to subjects I like. There's been some archaeology. 2 news stories happen to come together in this one. The heart is quiet. Why did the dog in Trinidad return to the burning house after he saved a sleeping man? Nobody else inside, the man said. Yet his dog ran back. Even a scientist reportedly mourned the death of the parrot in her lab when she knew he was not a colleague with whom to lunch. Dogs make distinctions too. We're not them, obviously, but they try not to make us feel on the fringe because of it, even if we can fly off the handle. In the ashes were the bodies of the dog and parrot. The man in his kitchen, his bird remarking, the dog dancing toward a morsel, guests arriving. Such bustle and color in the heart, everyone talking and eating. Is there anyone else inside? They asked the choking man when his dog ran back. He made the wrong distinction. So some of the poems I have, yes, are sort of travel related, with trains or other kinds. This airplane. This was from 2021, just as we're beginning to get back into going places. Breathing space. We turn out over the Atlantic, where one's white sliver and one bright skirt of speed flecks the ultramarine, elsewhere emptied of boats, near 9, hanging north to start the long descent to Boston, widening east to adjust for the stretch diagonal downward to meet coordinates of far runway. Shifts that feel as if I'm folded tightly into an origami square balloon, then inflated to each angle, ear, and eye, now falling, floating in place. When I see the miniature shape of large black whale inhaling air in jet blue's rhyming shadow, this August of traveling again, likely in a pod diving and rising east of my spy, but out of sight on our next tilted turn. I have, I think, 11 poems with whales and dolphins in this, whales or dolphins in my book. All different ways, all different ways. Day's eyes. So you never have those memories that come out of nowhere. You're not doing anything that has anything to do with the memory, and it shoots into your head. And that happened lots of times. And then finally, I wrote down when it happened. And then this Daisy means days. Day's eyes is what Daisy means. And in here, I'm referencing some Paul Klee artworks. Day's eyes. Riding under burrows, express train rising briefly beside me, a moment rose again, unbidden. Little me, cross-legged and bored, not napping, slips into violet ocean with koi and galaxy, turns and waves through pages, Paul Klee picture book opened, while my mother sleeps through migraine in the next room. Here's a water tower underneath a daisy growing toward the riverbed. I crossed the platform to another line. It was she who gave abstract art to her baby, an artist not living the art life, compelling me to. This poem came out of my experience of having been in this weird, fabulous local micro residency program called Poets Afloat, where the man who started it works in historic preservation, and he assigns each poet a particular historic boat in the New York Harbor to visit. Wild Burrow. Waterfront blushes. It's time to leave. Low tide moves across the floor. The city opens, one puncture more. Earlier, a skylight of day blue and tissue moon, metronomic mast of tethered sailboat. Energy captivates the space, shapes my feet today, when last Friday, high tide, this flat-bottom boat was as solid as a foundation. Last day visiting Lehigh 79 railroad barge, docked in Red Hook in a fresh, shivery April. I need the light for when I walk on Mill Street, a fenced sidewalk with traffic light and public service posters. What's good, Brooklyn? Under the BQE, past a gas station, the church where Al Capone got married, and the subway garden with its individual plots above rumbling tunnels. But I linger for persimmons and grays, tints of thistle, slippery blue, yolk. The doors on every side open to the shifting water. The captain and his wife visit with their daughter and her mate, talk about pizza toppings. The daughter, who used to ride bikes with her sister inside the barge, looping past the microwave and the old ship gauges, salvaged propellers. The father, who gave them separate spaces on the roof with walkie-talkies as they grew in and out of distances. I packed my journals, pen, and water-soluble pencils. And what's that sound, like metal scraping metal? Wing of the walkway, flexing in wind? Almost like the intake of breath on the little vaults of the harmonica. But no, it's a goose I hear, speaking out in the briefly brightening, darkening harbor, free of traffic, by the Wildborough's bank. Thank you.
I just want to say one of the images that's going to stay with me for a long time is the relationship between the dog and the parrot,
Yeah.
and how
Yes.
how unequivocal that sense of
Yes.
relatedness, aside from
I-
our human preoccupations with what
I think
matters.
of that dog, barking, trying to find a way to get the bird out of the cage, or just deciding to stay with it. Or I don't know. I tried, yes.
I'll
Well,
respond.
there is an opportunity for people to ask questions and put them
Yes.
in the chat, but
Checking,
but
but do we have any questions or let me see, we have some.
I did want to know, Dane, about whether especially since it's the most recent Hybern, but also the Cohen and
Yeah.
the response to the Cohens. How, and since you did whole books with them,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
expanding on them, if you could talk a bit about how these particular forms,
Yeah.
what they did. I mean, I don't know if they sort of how you expanded and found the language, or if it took you on a journey.
Oh, yeah. I think I grew up, so to speak. I didn't come up through the MFA world. I was raising kids and I was a therapist, but I learned kind of in the tradition of Dorian Locke's, Ellen Bass, who were both very present in the California arena about writing in a certain human narrative, accessible form that I still find very evocative. So I wrote and have a number of books kind of in that tradition.
Yes.
As well as The World is God's Language from 16 Rivers Press was my first experiment with prose poems, which Gary Young, the amazing prose poem writer from Santa Cruz, was my model there. So I kind of found very different expressions through the lineated poem and the prose poem, but I have to say that my relationship with Saddle Road Press and with Ruth and Don, embracing what was then just, they had a call for for manuscripts, I remember, in Poets and Writers, for hybrid work. And I was like, I don't know, what the hell is that? Well, I got some kind of hybrid. And I was beginning in earnest my Zen studies with John Tarrant of Pacific Zen School, and they really love the arts. And so the combination of that Zen community and, frankly, Ruth and Don saying, wow, we like something as different as that gave me permission. I think without that, I probably would have just put it in a drawer.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that, Dane, because, yeah.
Ruth's,
And then,
her own work, your own work has that form. You play with form and myth and,
Yeah, similar ones. And I do a lot comes out of Buddhist practice. So, I mean, not high level informed Buddhist, just meditation practice. But yeah,
best kind.
yeah, that kind. So, yeah.
And I think I got, along the way, there's a amazing poet, Joseph Stroud, with Copper Canyon Press, who comes from Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
And he writes in a variety of forms, which gave me a certain, you say and feel and become different when you write in different forms. I think I took inspiration too from in our European travels. I respond a lot in a call and response kind of way to Fernando Pessoa and Lorca. But Pessoa in particularly fascinated me because he had entire fictional characters writing their own books. And, and in therapy land, there's this thought of having different parts, So I think I just became comfortable with experimenting with voice. And I like being able to go back and forth.
Do you know Frank Gaspar's work? Dane?
Yes.
Frank Gaspar, writes a lot about Pessoa, and indeed has written an entire book. I call it channeling a book in the voice of another poet.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's a fascinating idea. And Amy, I'm struck by, it seems like, there's so much going on, obviously, in the world today, and that sense is what's underlying your work and mine, and increasingly many poets, And so it sounds like a lot of your exposure comes even through just news items that you imbibe and respond to and digest.
I have in the strange news headline especially, but I have written more poems in the past that are headlines, and then they have the headline, and then I use the best ones are if there seems to be not enough in the news story to there seems to be something missing, valuable, and so I write into that. I imagine into that, but yes, archaeology discoveries relate to lots of different things, and yes, in this one, animals, yes, the mistreatment of animals, I suppose. The man who had the tiger in the apartment had an alligator, and apparently also had at one time or another bear cubs, and then the problem came when he brought home a kitten and the tiger lunged at him. It's just, and then he had a rabbit in there. Just not lots of different rooms, and because he wanted a Garden of Eden, but the animals, but they're on the black market. All these, so but there's environmental destruction. And so I guess these are the things that concern me. And
but I think, Amy, what always strikes me about your work is people write about those things, but there's a unique quirky Amy mind.
yes.
It's the way it strikes you, and it's not like anyone else. And I think it's always really interesting to me. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think, true, I guess. Yes, I worry that it's that quirky aim in mind. Yes. Language, though, the language is too general, but word, like I played with in the goat gardeners take the high ground. I like words and their root meanings, especially if the root meanings are departure seems a departure, or the current usage seems a departure from the root meaning. That to me can create a poem. I can follow that trail into a poem. And so, and I like forms with repetition, a lot of repetition, or refrain, because of the slippery ways in which you can rework those. So, yeah, I guess that's it.
I think it's been absolutely fascinating. Both of you really enjoyed this reading, and the conversation between you both.
Me too.
Having Ruth as my publisher has been wonderful. You created this, when I found your press a while ago, before I knew I would have something I would send, because I do this look where I try to help people find publishers. And I just, it's similar to what you said, Dane, and sometimes it is it'll be a call for submissions that will spark something and make you think that you've got that. But the world of possibility within the interests that you had laid out, I thought, I want to have a book for them. I didn't know I would, but when I first saw it, but I did. Though I had already had a few books from them. So that's one of the ways in which writing happens. This is what I do in my press, or this is what I like to do in this journal, and then you're reading how particular writers fit in there, and that I think is endlessly inspiring to see what a writer writes and how they write about it, and where the communities lie. And but again, that's sorry.
Coming out of this reading is that many of the people attending the reading are other Saddlewood Press writers, so it's like they're the serendipity of a conversation, even if you're not actually talking in it, but you're hearing others, and community is such an overused word, but anyway, of finding like-mindedness in kind of odd ways throughout, and it just within one press. So it's really nice that you're all here. And well, if does anyone want to ask or say or anything? If not, we'll close things down. I think we'll have I think I've made the recording. We'll see. And there is now a YouTube channel. Don made it for Saddlewood Press. So it's Saddlewood Press, all one word. And that should have last month's and the first month's on this one. So
And Ruth, I'm seeing in the chat, Tanya says if there's time, she has one more question.
oh yes, Tanya, please do.
Thank you so much. This has been so beautiful and rich. So many gorgeous phrases and imagery. And so, Dane, I wanted to ask you, I love the Haibun form and just the way we get a narrative and then we get this gorgeous haiku chaser. So I wanted to ask you about the process of writing and what the haiku did for you in that process.
Yeah, so I for 10 years, I've been doing another Japanese literary form called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Zuitsu, which is a contemplative journaling process. And I love the descriptions of it, which is that you put anything, everything, including the kitchen sink and your socks and the latest emperor, into your journey, and it doesn't matter what it is. And I found that very freeing. So in a contemporary, non-Japanese form, an American, I began just, as I went through Europe, I continued this contemplative writing process. And then later, when I got back home, I'd been studying Haibun a little bit, and thought, I bet you there's something in the journaling itself that might be a series of vignettes And so I took from the journaling process these little poems, and then once I was home and I felt like I had a little frame, I would type it in, and then I would just sit quietly. And usually, first thought, best thought, not always best thought, but, that's the Zen thing. After about 30 seconds or a minute, a small informal haiku, not the traditional 575, would come. And occasionally I'd alter it, but usually that was it. And I just started doing that to see what came of it. And I ended up with a book that I didn't think I would have. And again, Ruth and Don were very essential in this process because they said, we like it. And so that communal permission, reflecting back that when you're experimenting, doing something new, that was an essential part of it too. So it was involved from all these different segments of just a contemplative practice that ended up taking a certain form. Thanks for asking.
Don Menge, you had a comment. You said,
I do. I have a quick comment, and it's well. First of all, I love both of those readings. But Amy, I would like to say that your sort of take on animality I found really, really touching, because there's like an abyssal disconnection between us and animals generally. They have a life of their own, but we're so wrapped up in human culture and human language that we rarely make the step, except for pets, I guess. That's the pet exception, right? Where we live with them and they become human for us. But I loved your wordplay, especially in the one about the whale. And it reminded me of Melville a lot, who is sort of like, he's the one who made me fall in love with whales. And I wondered about your journey towards animality, in a sense. What is it about animals and animality that really makes them such a presence in your poem that gets the way you played with fluke in yes. That poem? I found very sort of, it's beautiful because to me it tries to break down whatever abyss there is, or bridge whatever abyss there is between us and animals.
Wow, thank you for that. Well, in that case, of course, it's just I love double meaning. With whales in sixth grade, we had I think our social studies teacher wanted to teach us about grassroots politics, and so she had us save the whales, and it was the 70s, and so we each got a thing to do, but we learned about whales, the hunting of the whales, everything, and so that was a whole sort of immersion into a particular animal and why, and it had its own life really, and we should not kill it. It should live. It lived longer in its world than we in ours. And so there was that. And I think I'm the only one it stuck for that as an animal. I've continued to well, it's let's see. So I like animal behavior. I'm interested in worlds within worlds. There are poems in here that also have, you learn about whole life in the fields of a hamster, and considered a pest. But so are the people. Really, the people are the pests, really ruining their environment. I guess it must come from that, where I had gone to be near the ocean. I knew the ocean from a beach, but I hadn't really thought about. I had never seen a whale, and so the fact that I was near the body of water that contained all these animals that I'd never seen, I think that must have been the start. But yes.
But there's something epiphanic as well. When the dog recognizes that there's another being in the house, that's an epiphany, right? That's an epiphany.
Yes. I mean, they have their lives. Yes.
And that's what impresses me. You realize.
Yes,
that.
Thank you. We think of it, pets as our babies sometimes, or our children, but they have their own lives. They're adults. They're living their own lives, and they're just connecting with us. So I try to remember those things too.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, and I wish we could go on longer, but I think some people
Yeah.
need to go. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It's
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ruth,
Very
so
rich
much.
time.
Thank you, Dane, for this exchange.
Just
Yeah,
been
you too,
beautiful.
Amy.
So, yeah. Bye-bye.